Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. This hour, we're talking about history and how it connects us all through time. Albert Kahn is known in Detroit for the beautiful buildings lining downtown skyline, but he was so much more than an architect. He was a champion for Jewish people. We'll hear about Kahn as a designer and the gripping story of how Kahn helped keep a family alive and together during World War II. Then, the history of the indigenous peoples is often seen as lost to time. An author wanted to make sure the stories were told not simply to entertain, but to open minds. Noki and the Last of the Great Mound Builders explores the struggle and journey of Noki and how he's fighting to keep the memory of the mound builders alive. But we start with a historic preservationist who happened to be part of the very history she studied. Sometimes history reaches out to make itself known. A historic preservationist was going through an old, forgotten trunk when she discovered something extraordinary, decades-old journals inside. As she began to read through them, she realized they held more than family memories. They held the words of her family's journey to the United States during the height of World War II. The long-forgotten journals revealed a surprising connection to one of Detroit's most famous figures. During World War II, Albert Kahn, the legendary architect who shaped much of Detroit's skyline, quietly helped support her family. Nancy Finegood is the former director of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network, preservation consultant, and a board member of the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation Detroit. She joined the Metro and explained what she found and the unexpected ways the past can show up in our lives. We began our conversation learning what she actually knew about Albert Kahn and how the discovery has turned into an amazing treasure hunt.
I mean, I knew a lot. I spent a great deal of time with my grandparents, and they were very they would share their stories, and I knew that that they lived in Zurich, Switzerland, and that most people thought, that Switzerland wasn't threatened in World War II. But my grandmother actually told me the story of them having to leave Switzerland, in fear of the Nazis attacking, and most people thought that they were safe, but they truly weren't.
Which is something that a lot of people don't think of. They think of Switzerland being neutral. They don't think of, Switzerland being involved in anything or even being a dangerous place to be at that time, but it was.
Yes, correct. My grandfather, in fact, was in the armed services, which was similar to Israel. It was mandatory to sort of be drafted and to protect our country. And my grandfather was older when he was drafted.
Wow. And so once you have these stories from your grandparents and you're with them and you're learning, talk about the importance of them sharing these stories with you.
Oh, not only were my grandparents Tenenbaums, I would call them survivors. The other side of my family, my father's family, were Holocaust survivors as well. So I was particularly interested in, the family history and in the history of the sort of the entire area. And so my grandparents were just, both sets of grandparents were very open and about their, about the situation, and they shared with me. As a result of that, actually, I became a German major because I lived with both grandparents a great deal of the time and was able to learn much more because the English wasn't as good as they had hoped it would be.
The renowned Detroit architect Albert Kahn, he played a vital role in saving your family during World War II. Now, when you discovered that this was a part of your story as well, what was going through your mind?
At that time, I wasn't quite, I knew of Albert Kahn and legacy, and particularly in Detroit, you can't walk down the street without seeing a Albert Kahn design, building. But I had no knowledge that he was involved with actually saving my family until I found my mother's journal in this trunk in the basement after my grandparents passed away, it related the whole story about them leaving Switzerland and then having to go to Portugal and then on to the States. But it was then that I learned that Albert Kahn was one of two. I guess they have to be sort of sponsors. They had to have two sponsors to come to the United States. One was my grandfather's distant cousin, and the other was Albert Kahn. And it came to be because my grandfather was an architectural engineer in Europe, in Zurich, and his colleague / boss knew Albert Kahn and reached out to him and asked if he would sponsor this, young Jewish family to come to Detroit and give him a job.
And that's just amazing. So when you find this journal and you're reading through it, reading your mother's words, what's the first thing that's going through your mind as you're reading your mother's words, talking about this journey, but just talking about her life and the new life that she's here with her family building?
Oh, I was, and that's particularly why I wanted to write the story, share the stories, because I was so grateful. They would have never been able to leave unless, someone was willing to sponsor them. And apparently Kahn didn't. I spoke to some family members and others, and he was very philanthropic in the Jewish community. But most people didn't know the side of him, or many didn't know the side of him. So he did it quietly and, in response to a request from a good friend and colleague.
Did you ever think that you would be connected to history in this way, especially Detroit's deeper roots?
No, I couldn't imagine. I mean, I'm a passionate Detroiter. I've worked in preservation all over, actually, the country. But Detroit is my home, and the buildings are just magnificent. All of them. Kahns are definitely. I have a love in my heart for them, but I could never imagine. No, I just, I fell in love with the buildings. I'd walk down the street and, look up and trip over my feet, just, in awe of all the wonderful Detroit, history that we have at our fingertips.
Talk about some of the work that you've been able to do, especially when we just talk about the preservation of history. What have been some of your favorite projects you've been able to work on?
Good question. The Broderick building downtown. If you actually sit at the corner of Woodward and, I would say, down by Tiger Stadium. And if you sit at the corner there, you can look, down to the river. And my organization, MHPN, actually helped to save 8 buildings on Woodward, which is phenomenal. By partnering with developers to make sure that the projects were viable.
When you are going out to preserve some of these spaces, because I'm just really interested in the preservation of spaces, but when you're going out to preserve these spaces, what are you looking for?
Oh, I think the first thing you're looking for is, the architectural integrity. If there are. We have taken down way too many buildings in Detroit and, of course, in Michigan and across the country. But the first thing you look at is, is it a viable project? Or I'm afraid to say that there are some that are not, that cannot be saved. So structurally and, not as much design as windows, doors, facade, roof, the basics.
And with the city of Detroit, like you say, and across Michigan, but with the city of Detroit in particular, what does, creating that sense of space look like? What does it look like to preserve that sense of space in the city, especially downtown? So people, you'll be on a plane or something and tell people you're from Detroit, and they'll go like, "Ooh, Detroit," doesn't have the most wonderful reputation. Yeah, and I'm going every single time I meet someone. I said, "Come to Detroit. I will take you on a tour. I promise that you will be amazed." And I just explain it like Detroit was this
I say Detroit is sexy. So, there's this really good-looking man, and he's wearing a suit, and then he starts taking off his tie, and underneath it all is this beautiful, beautiful city, beautiful buildings. And that's how I explain it, and I've had people take me up on that, too.
I think I'm going to start using that analogy.
Feel free.
I love that so much, but it's so true. You just got to get past a few layers and boom.
Yes,
there it is,
yes.
One of the sexiest cities you've ever seen. I love that so much.
And we've had the philanthropists, who have jumped in. I mean, Dan Gilbert has saved three-quarters of downtown. And I don't mean him personally, but his passion, I think out of all the buildings that he's purchased, only one has been torn down, and there was a fire there. We need people to believe in the city, or the philanthropists that helped to bring the city back, Kresge and Kellogg, and all the foundations that have been integral to making the city come back.
Nancy, just speaking with you briefly and going right back to your family and your personal find, you see this trunk once again. You open the trunk, you're going through your family's belongings and valuables, and you're learning a little bit more about your own past. Just talk a little bit more, if you can, about someone else who may be looking to find more history about their families. How did you go about it?
So there are the archives at the Wayne State Library, and then, for example, our Kahn has an entire huge archive at University of Michigan. Start looking through newspapers and around the years that you're interested in. It's fun. It's like a treasure hunt.
When you were finishing up, you're getting ready to tell this story and preparing to package it up, and share with other people. What did you hope that people took away from the story?
Well, I was hoping that they would, reflect on a story of immigrants and coming to, in this case, Detroit, and the impact that the one person had on, their life, and the impact that that particular family, my family, had on the city.
Detroit is known to be a lot of things, a lot of different things. Detroit is a black city. It's also just as much an immigrant city, Middle Eastern, Latino, Asian American, South Asian. And that's not expanding into southeastern Michigan. So what do you think, or why do you think Detroit means so much to immigrants and vice versa?
Well, I mean, you spoke of arts and culture, right? I mean,
yeah.
The city is built on the various cultures. We have the largest Arabic population in the country, in Dearborn. I mean, not Detroit, but right next door, right? Same thing, with the Jewish community. We were one of the largest Jewish communities outside of New York City, and all these different cultures bring their arts, they bring their food, they bring their ideas. It's extraordinary.
Nancy, as we close, the history that you've uncovered is life-changing. It is. What have you already found pride in with the find?
Right, and not just unknown in my family, but his family and, and others who study him. I can only, profess to know this because I found my mother's diary, but it's an amazing story. It's really, he just quietly, you read about people that saved children during the war and brought them back to the States. Well, I don't know how many other families he did this for or to, because it's not known, and it was quiet, very, very quiet. And, there may be hundreds of others, there may be one other, but either way, truly, he saved my grandparents' life.
And Nancy, I'm curious, are you going to do anything further with this story? Are you going to travel and tell, have events, panels and have people have discussions? Are you going to help other people try to find their histories and connections? What else are you going to do with the information?
Sure. So, I'd like to make it, better known. I was glad to see that it was published in the Detroit Jewish News. Someone just did a presentation at another senior facility in West Bloomfield. I'm more than happy to share more of the story, but I'm happy having other people share it as well. So I'd like to get the word out.
Nancy Feingood is the former director of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network, a preservation consultant, and a board member of the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation, Detroit. She joined the Metro to talk more about her family's connection to the architect and the designer, who is Albert Kahn. Coming up, Albert Kahn helped support families in the U.S. during World War II. Now, we learn a little bit more about the designer. Stay right there. We'll be right back. This is The Metro